Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome to All Geeks Aside, the podcast where I take a look at the in-universe history of characters and objects, as we had in the last episode, of all things geek, be it from comics, manga, science fiction, and everything in between. Before I get into this week's character, I'm going to try something a little different. I put forward to my Facebook group and to Twitter to ask me some questions, and I've decided to include one at the beginning of this show. And this question comes from Deanna Ray. Her question reads, I'm wondering what got you into comics and doing a podcast. Have you always been into them, or did a specific hero draw you to them? And I've always been a comic book fan, a fan of cartoons in general since I was very small. My mother told me that I once demanded the TV to be turned on at a specific time every day so that I could watch the Thundercats and the Transformers. And as I grew up, I grew to love comics in general, and it just expanded. Alas, being from Ireland, I did not have access to comics on such a broad level as they did here in the United States. I did buy them when I would come across them, and then it started into drawing, and I would try and emulate everything that I saw in these pictures. As you can see, there's some of mine behind me. And now the podcast. I enjoy telling people stories. I enjoy writing stories. And I enjoy the history of the characters. Not so much how they came to be in the comic books being written and drawn, but more as their writer's story and how they progressed. But I will say that doing the podcast does get very, very scary at the start. Before I do each episode, it's a little bit odd. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on social media. I am at All Geeks Aside on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. And you can ask your questions there. And if you have enjoyed the shows up until now, why not head on over to my TeePublic store and buy some t-shirts, stickers, whatever. It helps not only me, but some of the artists who I have curated t-shirts from will also help them out. And the link will be in the notes below, and on my social media, it's pretty much everywhere. So with all that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Now, remember that movie that was released a couple of years ago that had the fabulous Ryan Reynolds in that beautiful body-hugging suit? No, not the red one, the green CGI one. Well, unfortunately, that was a poor portrayal of the character that I have chosen this time. However, in order for us to get a true understanding of this, we must first look at, one, where these people came from, this group. Two, what they were envisioned to do. And three, the true origins of their power. Now, it might not be in that particular order, and it is then and only then that we will be able to truly tell the story and the best version of this character. Before I continue to reveal the character that I'm doing this week, I want to thank the fan who reached out and asked me to do this one. He wanted to learn about the Green Lantern, and which one is Hal Jordan. It is very, very interesting. So prepare your ear holes as we dive deep into the history of not only Hal Jordan, but also the basics of the Green Lanterns as a whole. So before I get to Hal, I first want to look at why there exists a Green Lantern Corps in the first place. Who created them, and where does the power of the Green Lanterns come from? We will look at how the Green Lantern is chosen and how the powers are bestowed upon him. Plus, if I have time, I will look at the other kinds of lanterns that are in this universe, and we will be getting to that in the course of this episode. So in the beginning, there was nothing. And then an all-knowing, all-powerful God snapped his fingers and brought all of this as we know it into being. That's not completely wrong. But in fact, as we all know, sometime around 14 billion years ago, all of the matter in the universe converged to a single point no bigger than a pinhead. It is then that all the matter in the universe was expelled outwards in an explosion that we will hopefully never see the like of again. It is from this matter that all the heavenly bodies were created. Now in our story, the first of those heavenly bodies, to be inhabited at least, was the planet Malthus, and it was the residence of the Owens. And they lived there for many years, and things were plentiful, but space was finite on this planet, and it did eventually run out. The Owens did, however, eventually discover a symbiote, and that symbiote gave them the power of immortality, along with their superior intellect and also the power that in the future would aid them in becoming the Guardians. But now that made their blight of the planet being so small even larger, as now they had to find a new planet. It is unclear if the population continued to grow, but they had bigger plans. They saw that the universe that was being created was in chaos. The Owens wanted to bring balance, sort of like the Jedis, bring it to peace and all of this. Their scientific minds thought up a way to help the universe. And as a result, the Manhunters were born. Well, created. The Manhunters were a proto-Lantern Corps. The problem is they were machines, and as we all know from movies, that when machines are given any form of artificial intelligence, things tend to go a little bit awry, even with the addition of the Asimov 3 rules. These Manhunters were created some 3 billion years ago, and they were doing a good job except for one thing. They had no sense of fear, and they were not great at preserving their existence. But with their intelligence so large, they soon began to realize that they were literal slaves. The Manhunters decided to stand up and rebel against their would-be Owen overlords. The Owens, or the Guardians as they will be known as from now on, ended up defeating the Manhunters. But it was not all that easy. It did take thousands of years of war for the Guardians to squash this rebellion and strip the Manhunters of all their powers and banish them to the far reaches of the galaxy. The Guardians still wished to bring order to this chaos. They wanted to be the keepers of the peace. But how could they achieve this now? Living beings felt fear, and they would listen a lot quicker than their robotic predecessors. But how would they supply this new force with the power required to protect the galaxy? To arm this new legion of Celestial Knights, the Guardians created the Power Rings. Rings of inconceivably advanced technology that allowed the wearer to project green beams of energy or constructs with which the bearer could conjure objects of any size, any shape, limited only by his or her imagination and pure willpower. Although the connection between the Guardians and the origin of the Green Lantern symbol has yet to be seen, it has been revealed that the lantern itself has its root with the first life in the universe. The first life in the galaxy emerged on an unnamed foggy world. And when they developed a police force, the first in the universe, the constabulary carried a lantern lit with the green chemical flame, hence a corps of Green Lanterns. It is believed that the idea was adopted and spread throughout the galaxy as a symbol for law and justice, and its ability to pierce confusion and uncertainty, eventually resulting in the formation of the Green Lantern Corps, with requisite power rings and lantern-shaped batteries along the traditional lines. Initially consisting of only a few dozen agents at a time, the Corps radically increased its numbers approximately 1,000 years ago. So now we know where the Green Lanterns came from and what the Green Lanterns are. How were the Green Lanterns chosen? What would their core personality be? Their core beliefs? At the core, the Green Lanterns have to feel no fear. This was because their green rings were powered by willpower alone. You see, the rings are in fact linked to the emotional spectrum, and the green power ring was embodied of will. But how would the Guardians choose their new warriors? Well, in the beginning, the Guardians went out into the wild and savage universe to seek out beings that they saw fit. But it was during a great battle on the planet Rogira that they found their first of many lanterns, and his name was Rory Dag. It is by the example of Rory Dag that all future lanterns will be based on, or even judged on. It is also now that the Guardians turned new precincts or planetary sectors into a more manageable device. The areas were named space sectors, and can you guess what our little blue planet, what its space sector was? Well, it was Space Sector 2814, which is a little bit of weird trivia. But then we are at the point that we can talk about the first human to ever have been chosen to join the ranks of the Green Lantern. Now, where do all histories start? Well, at the beginning. So let us go back to the time before Hal was graced with the power of the Green Lantern, and before he was overtaken by the evil Parallax, before he was kicked out of the Green Lantern Corps, before he was known as a pariah to all of the universe. Hal Jordan was born in Coast City, a fictional city similar to Metropolis, or Gotham. Yes, like most DC and Marvel comics, this is, let's call it, a parallel Earth where metahumans exist, and all manner of crazy threats also exist. Hal's parents were Martin and Jessica Jordan, and he was the middle of 3 boys. It is unknown what Hal's mother did, but his father, Martin, was a test pilot for Ferris Air. Now, Hal, like all young boys, idolizes his father. Being a test pilot can be a very dangerous job, which Martin knew, but sometimes he would take his young boy Hal to work with him, as he showed an interest in aviation. But aviation, well, experimental aviation is like a caged tiger, and it will eventually break out and take your head off. The day that the tiger came for Martin was an unfortunate one, and unfortunately, Hal was present and witnessed the whole ordeal. Following the accident, Hal's mother forbid him and his brothers forever joining anything to do with aviation. Now, my father tried to do this with me when I was planning to join the Irish Air Corps many years ago. Hal was not always one who followed wishes of anyone, be it his mother or anyone else, so he went off and joined the Air Force. Unfortunately, since he wasn't one to follow orders, he was soon kicked out of the military. He would soon after that join the very company that his father had been employed in all those years ago. That was Ferris Air. Now, like his father before him, he was a test pilot as well. Now, I must say I can see some kind of similarities here between myself and Hal. Not that my father died in a plane crash, but the fact that I've always looked up to him, and in the end I followed in his footsteps and became an aircraft technician. Now, here is where Hal excelled. He was a phenomenal pilot and quickly became their top test pilot. Hal was therefore given the job of testing their newest plane, but technology has since advanced to the point that not even test pilots can walk away intact, even if their aircraft does not. Now, while Hal was an excellent pilot and showed no fear in the face of death, so when his craft got into difficulty, he bailed out and landed in the desert. It is here that Hal met a strange being who appeared to be injured. And he was injured from a spaceship crash, and he was wearing a green suit. The alien revealed himself to be Abin Sur, and he told him that he was a Green Lantern, and that Hal had been selected as the next candidate to wear his ring. He handed over his ring and told him all about the lanterns and what their purpose was in the universe. With the ring handed over to him, he places it on his hand and says the oath of the lanterns. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. With that, Hal was transformed into a Green Lantern, complete with a Robin mask covering his eyes. Hal would then start his job as living a double life as a hero, working by day at Ferris Air and working at night protecting Space Sector 2814 as well as Earth. So now we go and see where Hal has been doing all this time on Earth and in space. Eventually, Hal is taken to Oa, the home planet of the Guardians, and the 3,600 other Green Lanterns. He gets introduced to the Guardians, and they tell him that while he has been doing a sufficient job, he is going to be given some training. His first teacher was Sinestro, and his drill instructor was the mean Kilowog, who, if you've seen the movie, you've seen both of these characters. Once he had received his training, he went forth and protected the Earth as well as his space sector again. Now, Green Lantern was also one of the founding members of the Justice League, like I've said before, along with the Flash, Barry Allen, Aquaman, the Martian Manhunter, John Jones, and Black Canary. Now, this group first banded together when they met the Appalachians invading the planet and realized that they worked much stronger as a team than they could have individually. Now, Hal and Oliver Queen, Green Arrow, were also good friends, and they often went out on missions together. He was also friends with the late Barry Allen, the second Flash, as I covered in my Barry Allen episode, who, along with Hal, were both founding members of the Justice League of America, like I said earlier. Later still, Hal retained a friendship with their respective sidekicks, be them Roy Harper for Oliver Queen and Wally West for Barry Allen. Hal was always something of a ladies' man, and he had courted more than his fair share of beautiful women in his time. Of these women, the one whom Hal had been closest to was his boss, Carol Ferris, of Ferris Aircraft. Unfortunately, though, their relationship was repeatedly strained by Carol's position as Hal's boss to her dedication to running the company, as well as Hal going through a period of instability where he moved around constantly trying new jobs that did not suit him. Even worse, Carol was chosen by the Zamorans to be a Star Sapphire, a beautiful supervillainess who repeatedly menaced the world, and most specifically the Star Sapphires targeted men. And the Star Sapphires are another core of lanterns. They are purple lanterns. Now, one of the greatest secrets kept by the Guardians up to this point was that their Green Lantern battery had an impurity, and it was the infamous yellow impurity that was in fact an ancient monster named Parallax, who they had imprisoned in their central power battery. Parallax was in fact the physical embodiment of fear on the emotional spectrum, the opposite of the green willpower. After the greatest tragedy of his life took away everything that he held dear, Hal had become susceptible to fear, and Parallax gained root in his consciousness through his ring. through influencing his actions, it would eventually possess him and turn him into one of the greatest villains the universe had ever seen. Hal Jordan's home, Coast City, had been completely destroyed at this point by Cyber Superman and Mongol in a gigantic explosion, reducing it to a crater and a wasteland. Sadly, all 7 million of the residents were killed in this explosion. But Hal was not on Earth at this time to try and save the people and his hometown from the destruction. But upon returning to Earth, Green Lantern Hal Jordan was completely furious, and it is understandable. He immediately went after Mongol and beat the Galactic Conqueror in single combat. After this, with everything that he cherished in piles of cinder and ash, Hal tried using his ring to recreate Coast City in its entirety. Now, this was a massive overtaking that would require all of the charge of his ring as well as his battery. It is then that people from his past, who he loved and had perished in the attack, began to interact with him. There was, however, a hitch. A lantern does not use the ring for personal gain, even if it is for doing something that is full of good intentions. The Guardians found out what he was doing, and they contacted him through a projection on his ring, and they were furious that he was using his powers for his personal reasons and threatening him unless he immediately reported back to them for disciplinary actions that he wouldn't like the outcome, basically. Enraged that they would ignore the personal loss that he had suffered in the name of the Corps and try to punish him for his humanity, Hal begins to go crazy and is driven insane by the grief. He decides to meet them head on and clash with the men who had taken all that he loved. In a state of madness, Hal was seeking more power and more power so that he could recreate all that he had lost. He is met by a team of Green Lantern Corps' greatest warriors who were sent to oppose him and stop him before he could reach Oa. Hal defeated several of these lanterns in single combat, but he did not kill them. He did leave them defeated, floating aimlessly in space, and he took their rings into his possession, adding them to his collection. Touching down on Oa, he is met by his once drill sergeant Kilowog, and he defeats him in single combat and kills him. His greatest adversary, Sinestro, who was released from an imprisonment since he had been a bad boy at the beginning, and I didn't go over this because I didn't see any point, but yeah, Sinestro was in prison at this point and was released from imprisonment to act as a last line of defense against Hal. And Hal viciously and without the slightest bit of mercy smashed him through a wall with a force that should have killed him, but it didn't. Then Hal is now at the central power battery, and he starts to absorb all of the Green Lantern energy that is stored within, killing the Guardians and effectively destroying the entire Green Lantern Corps. When Hal emerges from the Green Lantern central power battery, he is no longer Hal Jordan. He is now Parallax. And Parallax is the enemy from that horrible movie that we shall not speak of, and in that he is a little bit different. He is portrayed by somebody else, but Hal Jordan became Parallax. And Parallax feeds off of fear. So the Green Lanterns are effectively powerless against Parallax. And when he feeds off the fear, he kills you by making you afraid and then eats the fear. As Parallax, Hal goes out and fights his former ally, Kyle Rayner, who had been the newest Green Lantern, while attempting to restore Coast City back to its natural state. Hal had conspired with Hank Hall to restart the universe and attempt to sway others to his cause by offering them wealth and power in the new, reborn, rebooted universe, the purpose of which was to set things right. Unfortunately, Hal was ultimately defeated by the heroes of Earth. Hal seemed to gain clarity and healing the paralyzed John Stewart, who was also a Green Lantern, and resurrecting Oliver Queen, who had died in an explosion. He extinguishes his powers and sacrifices himself to destroy the Sun Eater and reignite the Earth's sun. Sometime later, the being known as Spectre, who, if you're not really aware, is basically the embodiment of God's vengeance. Well, his former host had finally found peace and therefore had passed into the afterlife, thus leaving the entity Spectre in an astral form. Now, this was bad, as when Spectre is in his astral form, he is in fact in a weakened state. And some demons had learnt of this and wanted to use the power of the Spectre for their own nefarious means. Now, with the help of some of the Sentinels of Magic, who are exactly what they are, Sentinels of Magic, Hal became the new host for the Spectre. And Hal attempts to change the Spectre's mission from vengeance to that of redemption, using his powers to remove the Star Sapphire's persona from his old flame, Carol Ferris. However, the Spectre had a much stronger will, and Hal had no choice. But the Spectre did have alternative motives for, in fact, attaching himself to Hal Jordan, and he explained to Hal that the parasitic fear demon known as Parallax had taken him over while he was trapped by the Guardians inside the central battery. Having been awoken and directed to Hal by Sinestro, though Parallax was able to suppress the Spectre, Hal was able to fight off Parallax and separate both Parallax and the Spectre from his soul. Now, the Guardian known as Ganta sent out a beacon of light to guide Hal's soul back to his body, and Hal Jordan was reborn as the Green Lantern once again. Together with the other human Lanterns, Kyle Rayner and John Stewart, and now Guy Gardner, and their good friend Kilowog. It was Hal alone who ends up defeating Sinestro. They clash in hand-to-hand combat, during which both Hal's and Sinestro's rings smash together. All focus was bent and altered until Hal smashes Sinestro's ring into pieces, as Sinestro is then teleported back to the anti-monitor universe of Q-Ward. You see, this is where the Guardians send their prisoners, especially those who are very, very evil and have too many nefarious things on their mind. They also re-imprisoned Parallax back in the central battery, and the Green Lantern Corps was reborn once again. Seeking to atone for all of his actions while he was under the influence of Parallax, he became the Green Lantern of Sector 2814 once again. He is also able to rejoin the Justice League, despite Bruce Wayne Batman's mistrust of him. But Batman really doesn't trust anyone, does he? So Hal also got a new job. He was once again a test pilot at Coast City, which he had subconsciously rebuilt while he was in the form of Parallax. Hal later helped to rescue various missing Green Lanterns, including some he had battled with during his time as Parallax, including his rampage on Oa and his former lover, Arnicia. After the events of Infinite Crisis, which I have explained before, but now I will tell you how the Guardians of Oa may be the ones who are truly responsible for this whole ordeal. You see, it is due to an unfortunate accident eons ago that brought the Anti-Monitor universe into being, and thus the Anti-Monitor as a result. Now, as we know, following this, there are some changes, one of which was that Sinestro is now free from the Anti-Monitor universe, and he is running amok once again. And you see, Sinestro was now an enemy of the Green Lantern, and he had created his own Lantern Corps, as well as his own power ring. Well, when I say created, I don't really mean that. I mean that he stole the ring from the Guardians who had been creating it to battle Parallax, which meant that it didn't run on willpower. No, Sinestro's yellow ring ran on fear, thus rendering Parallax's greatest weapon null and void. During the Sinestro Corps War, Coast City was targeted for destruction by the Sinestro Corps, and Hal urged the city to evacuate. Instead, people all over the city put out their green lights in support of Hal and the Green Lantern Corps. Hal and Kyle Rayner were able to defeat Sinestro in hand-to-hand combat and place him under arrest, thus ending the war. Now, this is very similar to when Goku is fighting and he asks every being in the whole of the universe to lend him his energy so he can create a spirit bomb to defeat the big enemy that he's trying to kill at the time. Now, after the war with the Sinestro Corps, Hal is one of the Green Lanterns chosen to escort Sinestro to his home planet, where Sinestro will be executed. Upon arrival, the escort team is unfortunately ambushed by what remained of the renegade Sinestro Corps. But if that wasn't bad enough, they were then attacked by a bloodthirsty and heartless group known as the Red Lantern Corps. And if their oath wasn't enough of a clue, then here we go. With blood and rage of crimson red, ripped from a corpse so freshly dead, together with our hellish hate, we'll burn you all, that is your fate. You see, they are truly a bloodthirsty and heartless group. So now, at this point, we have seen 3, maybe 4 different Lantern Corps that have shown up in this whole thing. We have the Sinestro Corps, or Yellow Lanterns, the Red Lanterns, the Star Sapphires. But we have met some of the Lantern colors, but here are more. There are 7 Lantern Corps or colors in total, each with their own association or part of the emotional electromagnetic spectrum. And their colors have their respective representations are as follows. We have green for willpower, we have white for life, we have red for rage, we have blue for hope, we have orange for greed, we have yellow for fear, and we have violet for love, indigo for compassion, and last and most deadly, we have black for death. So there we can continue along and see if any of the other lanterns pop up in this, discuss them further as they do. Now, the Red Lanterns captured Sinestro, leaving both Green Lanterns and Sinestro Corps members behind to die. Hal and the rest of the Green Lanterns are then rescued by the Blue Lantern known as Saint Walker. All then goes with Walker to their home planet of Odium. Here it is where Hal is witness to a Blue Lantern actually being inducted into the Blue Lanterns, and his name was Wrath. You see, the Blue Lanterns take bad people, convert them into Blue Lanterns, and now they are good. Hal argues with Ganthet, the Guardian, about rescuing Sinestro from the Red Lanterns, only for him to eventually agree to said rescue. Hal then reluctantly teams up with the Blue Lanterns, Walker, and Wrath to rescue Sinestro from Atrocitus, who is the leader and first Red Lantern. In a conversation with Walker during this time, he discovers that Ganthet is expecting him to join the Blue Lantern Corps as its new leader. On the planet, Hal is captured by the Red Lanterns and hung from a cross next to Sinestro. The Blue Lanterns, with Hal and Sinestro now captured by the Red Lanterns, they have no chance of escape. But the Blue Lanterns and the remaining Sinestro Corps arrive and free both Hal and Sinestro respectively. Trying to free Lyria from the influence of the Red Lantern's power ring, Hal nearly succeeded, but she is unfortunately killed by Sinestro. This causes Hal to lose complete control, and his dormant anger unleashes as he attempts to murder Sinestro. This attracts a Red Lantern power ring, inducting him into the Red Lantern Corps. Now, there is a downside or inherent flaw to the Red power rings. They actually cannot create constructs. They have just pure rage. Under the influence of the Red power ring, Hal attacks both Sinestro Corps and the Blue Lanterns. Hal being a powerful Green Lantern, something odd happens. Hal is able to construct Red Lantern constructs. When Hal again attempts to murder Sinestro, Walker forces his blue ring on Hal in a desperate attempt to free him from the Red Lantern's power ring influence. You see, when a Red Lantern removes his ring, he dies, but the Blue Lanterns appear to have the power to remove them without killing its wielder. Successfully breaking the Red Lantern's power ring hold on Hal, Walker returns him to normal. Hal then turns his sights to Atrocitus, during which the Red Lantern power ring explodes. While Atrocitus is left wounded, Hal seemingly is unharmed, wearing a green and blue hybrid uniform of both lanterns, with neither lantern knowing why. This was clearly the coming of something much larger than Hal had ever even thought of. Hal returns to Odin with Saint Walker and Rat to try and remove the blue ring. Here he is met with Ganthet and Syed to tell them that he will not abandon the Green Lanterns to join the Blue. Ganthet tells him that this was never the intent to make him a Blue Lantern, but for him to become the leader of the Blue Lanterns as a Green, reasoning that Hal's willpower would be strong enough to power the whole Blue Lantern Corps. Less than thrilled about being thought of as nothing more than a battery, Hal asked how to remove the blue ring. Ganthet explains that the only way to remove it is for Hal to use up the ring's charge, which can only do so if he gets a spark of hope. Hal is then called back to Oa by the Guardians, so that they can remove the blue ring themselves. The Guardians are unable to remove the blue ring, but continue to blast Hal with green energy in an attempt to actually destroy it. John Stewart stops them from continuing to blast Hal since it has no effect. Salak, the Guardian, informs them of an encounter with an orange lantern. A hologram of an orange lantern of a being known as Larfleeze appears from Stell's body. Larfleeze gives demands to the Guardians. However, you see, years ago, the Vega system was deemed off-limits to Green Lanterns by Larfleeze. He wanted the power of the orange battery and the ring to himself. It is then that the Sacred Guardians, aptly named Scar, destroys the hologram. Scar then requests that a new law be made, making Vega system no longer off-limits to the Guardians, and that they get involved in this war. Hal is one of the Green Lanterns chosen to travel with the Guardians to face Larfleeze. Larfleeze takes an interest in Hal's blue ring and decides to take him underground to separate him from the rest of the Lanterns and Guardians. As I mentioned before, the Orange Lanterns are the essence of greed, but it is more like how Gollum was attracted to the ring, and he needed to have it, he had to have it, and he would kill anyone to claim his prize. Larfleeze demands that Hal gives him the blue ring, and Hal converses with him, wherein he learns that the Orange Lanterns are actually just constructs of beings Larfleeze has killed over the years. After a brief battle, Hal agrees to give Larfleeze his blue ring, but only if Larfleeze tells him how he met the Guardians. Using the blue ring's recharging ability to his advantage, Hal creates an army of Green Lantern constructs to battle the Orange Lanterns. Realizing that Larfleeze's ring must be constantly recharged by his orange power battery to create his orange lanterns, Hal tries to steal said battery. While holding the battery, Hal is under its influence. However, Larfleeze jumps in and takes his battery back and uses it to create a giant construct of himself. Unable to make a dent in his construct, Hal is frustrated and is unable to make his green ring work anymore. He knows that they'll beat Agent Orange or Larfleeze, but he just doesn't see how. Suddenly, the blue ring registers sincerity in Hal's belief that they will defeat Larfleeze and unleashes a massive blast of blue light, which destroys Larfleeze's construct. The ring then drops off his finger and initiates a sector scan of Sector 2828. The Guardians, having defeated Larfleeze, intend to make a new pact with him, and tells him that no Green Lanterns will ever come again. Hal meets the Flash after this, after returning to Earth, at an unmarked grave of Bruce Wayne Batman. The two friends discuss Bruce Wayne's death. Sorry, spoiler alert, but Batman, nothing is ever easy with him. We'll get to it. They also contemplate on their own mortality. Hal tells Barry that his funeral was attended by many people, even those from different times and different universes, while his own tombstone was desecrated not by his enemies, by old allies from when he was taken over by Parallax. Hal believes that after Barry died, villains became more deadly, and the Justice League was no longer untouchable. They continue to discuss the deaths of Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, and Batman, and then they part ways. Hal then comments that Barry died a saint, while he died a sinner. Hal, along with John Stewart, Guy Gardner, and Kyle Rayner, attend a parade at Coast City on the anniversary of Superman's death. Sorry, more spoiler alerts. Maybe they'll come up in a Batman and Superman episode, which the death of Superman had become a national holiday for fallen heroes. Think of it as a superheroes' Memorial Day. But not only that, it was also a day of remembrance for those who the heroes had failed to save. Hal thinks about the deaths that have affected the 4 Earth Green Lanterns, such as his father, Abin Sur, Katma Tui, John Stewart's wife, Alex DeWitt, and Jade, both former girlfriends of Kyle, and he mentions that Ice's return from the dead makes Guy the only one of the 4 with a happy ending. Following the parade, Hal meets up with Barry Allen and the Flash at the Hall of Justice, where the two look over the Justice League of America's morgue, which contains mostly supervillain remains. Hal explains that the supervillain remains are put in a vault since Dick Grayson uncovered a corpse harvesting ring. The conversation then leads to Barry's question about how many heroes died since he was gone, which Hal shows him through his ring. The pair are then contacted by Alfred Pennyworth, Batman's butler, who tells him that Bruce's grave was dug up and his skull is missing. The rabbit hole is going ever deeper. Hal and Barry go to Gotham to investigate this, when the previously deceased John Jones appears before them as a lantern, but not one that we have seen up to this point. He appears to be an almost zombie, but with a black suit and a black power ring. Yes, he was a Black Lantern, telling them that they should be both dead. They have a fight, and John retreats, and Jordan, Hal, and Barry continue investigating. Hal now finds himself facing many of his deceased allies, enemies, and people he has failed in the past. They are reanimated as undead Black Lanterns under the control of the Green Lantern's ancient enemy, known as Necron. Hal has to team up with Barry Allen, who is also resurrected from his death, but he must also work with his enemies, be that Sinestro, Atrocitus, Larfleeze, and his former love, Carol Ferris, who is now a Star Sapphire again. He also allies with Saint Walker of the Blue Lanterns and somebody new, the Indigo tribe. His name is Indigo One. The Guardians Gantet and Syad are also present, and they are doing so to save the universe. When the Black Lantern's power level reaches 100%, Scar arrives at Coast City with the Black Lanterns. You see, a human has been helping them this whole time, a human by the name of Black Hand, and he is the one who bid Necron to rise. He then bids Coast City deceased to rise as the Black Lantern rings fall to their graves. Along the way, Hal and Barry end up battling with personal demons as they face the consequences of being resurrected. And soon, a black power ring reanimates the skull that Black Hand had stole from the grave. It is Black Lantern Batman. You see, it was Black Hand, the human name of Michael Hand, who was prophesied to bring back Negron years prior, who stole Batman's skull. To do this, he stuck his hand deep into the ground where Batman's grave was and recited the Black Lantern Oath. The blackest night falls from the skies, the darkest grows as all light dies. We crave your hearts and your demise. By my black hand, the dead shall rise. So Batman is now a Black Lantern, but there is something different about him. As Batman begins to cough up black power rings, they head out towards superheroes that are long past. Superman, Green Arrow, Kid Flash, Superboy, Donna Troy. Necron reveals that it was him that allowed the heroes to be resurrected after their deaths. As their friends have now become Black Lanterns, Hal and Barry escape from the Black Ring's pursuit by going 2 seconds into the future. Gantet then initializes a program in Hal's ring which duplicates it. Gantet attaches the duplicate to his hand and inducts himself into the Green Lantern Corps. His last act as Guardian is to initialize the same program in the other power rings to deputize individuals for 24 hours, citing that though each ring is different from each other, they are all based on Owen technology. While Gantet himself is the Green Lantern Corps deputy, the other duplicates seek out beings capable of their respective emotion to serve as temporary members of each corps. Atrocitus's ring attaches itself to Aquaman's wife Mera. Saint Walker's ring attaches itself to Flash. Larfleeze's ring goes to Lex Luthor. Sinestro's ring goes to the Scarecrow, while Indigo One's staff welcomes the Atom into the Indigo tribe. And Carol's ring attaches itself to Wonder Woman, which frees Diana from the Black Lantern ring attached to her finger and brings her back to life. In order to fully recreate the white light, Ganto has Indigo One and her tribe bring all of the members of the other cores to Earth so that they can destroy Necron and the Black Lantern Corps. While defending Coast City, the Lanterns encounter a Black Lantern Spectre and are hard-pressed to defeat him, threatening Hal into almost becoming a Black Lantern himself, remembering from a period in which he was possessed by the Spectre that Parallax is the one thing that the spirit of retribution or vengeance fears most. Hal allows himself to be possessed by the fear entity once more in order to stop him. After the Spectre is freed from Necron's influence, Parallax is again kidnapped by an unknown being, and the Spectre disappears, after finding out that he actually had no power to control Necron. After finding out that Necron was after the entity of white light, he discovers that the entity originated on planet Earth and not on Oa as the Guardians had first said. Hal realizes that the entity needs a host similar to that of Parallax. As Hal attempts to leave Parallax, Sinestro tells him that it is his destiny to be the host and not Hal. After Necron separates Sinestro from the entity, Hal bonds with it and uses its power to transform the resurrected Black Lanterns into new beings. They are now White Lanterns. They revive Black Hand's Necron's anchor to the living plane, who then coughs up white power rings. A white ring enters the main black power battery, reviving and freeing the DC Universe's most feared being, the Anti-Monitor. The Anti-Monitor then unleashes antimatter at Necron. So Necron sends the Anti-Monitor back to its home dimension of Q-Word. Necron is finally destroyed by the white power rings, who go for Osiris, Captain Boomerang, Aquaman, Hawkman, Hawkgirl, and Maxwell Lord. Jade, Professor Zoom, Firestorm, Martian Manhunter, and Deadman, resurrecting the once dead heroes and villains alike in a strange, odd turn of events. The white power entries just up and leaves. After all of this had happened, Hal and Barry discussed the events and how Black Lantern Batman did not recognize them, giving them hope that Batman is not in fact dead, but he is still alive and hiding out somewhere else. And they also wondered where this entity had gone. This is not the end of our journey, but it is the end of this episode. Tune in next time where we will learn about Hal teaming up with Sinestro, facing off against the new gods, learning what the White Lantern really is, and losing all of his powers. Thanks for listening. See you next time.